You're listening to Bloomberg Markets with Bonnie Quinn and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, when we talk about firing up the grid and the electrical grid in the United States, we think about oil and as a primary source of energy here and the volatility in the oil markets. But let's not forget nuclear energy is also a key part of the energy grid in the United States. And to talk about that and get an update on all things on the nuclear front, we welcome Seth Grae, President and CEO of Lightbridge Corporation. Seth, thanks so much for joining us here. I'd love to get your just thoughts here on how the nuclear plants, the nuclear energy grid in the United States has performed during this pandemic.
Yeah, the plants have been running at full power 24/7, other than the ones going through their scheduled refueling and maintenance outages. So they've been a critical part of our electricity on the grid, providing 20% of all the power in the nation during the pandemic. And they've been critical to the people who need the power, which is not just all of us enjoying the lights and computers on and the air conditioning, but keeping our food supply going, our energy supply of moving other fuel that depends on electricity to move, and the first responders in the hospital that need it, the refrigeration in the hospitals, etc. So, nuclear has been doing well and handling the pandemic very well in a carefully coordinated industry effort.
So, Seth, give us a sense of just, the volatility in the energy business. When you look at, WTI crude or Brent crude or anything quoted across the globe, energy prices, oil prices are generally fairly low here. They're certainly not up at that $80, $90, $100 a barrel level that we've seen. How does that factor into the calculus of whether to build a nuclear power plant in a particular market?
Not as much as most people think. The petroleum-based fuels are mostly for transportation, for cars, trucks, airplanes, etc., and very little of our transportation sector is yet powered by electricity. Some of the trains are, a few of the cars. But nuclear is mostly for electricity of powering the lights, the air conditioning, so many other things. And they tend to be pretty separate markets. So the electrical generating utilities, which include fossil fuels of natural gas and oil, do tend to be separate from the petroleum fuels that power transportation and how the price moves.
All right, so as we think about, you mentioned that nuclear funds about 20% of our electrical needs here. What's the trend been there? Is there an expectation that more nuclear plants will be built? What's the outlook there?
There are 2 plants under construction in Georgia. Globally, a lot more than that, including many in China and in Europe. Here in the U.S., we just had 1 plant close that was scheduled to close, a couple others in Illinois that have been announced that they will close. But the amount of energy generated by nuclear has stayed pretty level as a percentage of the energy the country needs, even as energy needs have grown, because the plants have gotten so much more efficient at generating more power from the plants, at running at full power over 90% of the time, about 93% of the time is a national average, which is the highest in the world. So the future of nuclear, though, I think is tied to new reactors being deployed, some of which will be newer, smaller technologies that are coming along, or new advanced fuels like what Lightbridge is developing, and certainly what we're seeing in the developing world across Africa, much of Southeast Asia, Latin America, Eastern Europe, not developing but fairly developed, already looking at new nuclear plants, and it's something of a race among Russia, China, and the U.S. as to who's going to grab these markets, and they have tremendous strategic advantages for those who do. So the U.S. government has really been stepping up at providing funding to Lightbridge and other companies that could help the U.S. compete and win in these markets. And we're also in a race on climate change, and that's not just purely a climate issue, that's a major business issue of which country will be the major supplier of solutions globally.
What companies in the U.S. actually build these reactors?
Well, the main designers of the reactors have been groups led by GE and Westinghouse, and the main builders have been the big construction companies like Bechtel and Fluor. But now we have some smaller entrants like NuScale designing a small reactor.
Interesting, and we'll have to see how that plays out. So again, about 20% of the U.S. power grid fueled by nuclear fuel. Been a pretty steady there. Seth Grae, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it as always. Getting an update on the nuclear power situation in the United States. About 95 nuclear plants in the U.S. Again, as Seth was saying, generate about 20% of the power, and they, as Seth was mentioning, performing quite well. And quite reliably. I guess that's a good news during the pandemic. Seth Grae, President and CEO of Lightbridge Corporation, joining us. We appreciate that.